Hi everyone, I'm Shelly and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. I'm back with another Question the Narrative video, and I really hope that I can do this topic justice because I think I'm going to be trying to pack so much in here while trying to be concise, so I'm hoping that I succeed. But today's topic is Cabbage Patch Babies, orphan trains, and the reset. And yeah, I'm going to share a eureka moment that I had last night, of course, while trying to sleep. I have had so many people leaving comments about the channel Mind Unveiled and their Cabbage Patch Kids or Cabbage Patch Babies videos. And I've been subscribed to Mind Unveiled for quite a long time, but I never actually have the time to sit and watch videos, not just their videos, but I very rarely sit and watch YouTube at all, which is why I never got around to doing them. But we had a snowy weekend here in Pennsylvania, couldn't really do much. So I spent Saturday and Sunday watching Mind Unveiled. I watched My Lunch Break and I watched Now You See TV. And my mind was racing after watching those things all day because I was diligently sitting there trying to take notes to remember things that I wanted to remember. And so unfortunately, when I went to bed, my mind was still going a mile a minute. Practically every day when I go to bed at night, one of the things that I pray for is discernment because it is never my intention to lead anyone astray. So that's exactly what I did last night. I prayed for discernment and I just prayed for the Lord to reveal the truth to me. And I prayed that I would know that it was 100% from Him, and that again, because I don't want to lead people down paths that they shouldn't be on. And I was having a tough time sleeping even after praying, just because I kept thinking of this topic, and all of a sudden something just, it's like my eyes shot open and I realized something about the charts, that the population charts that were shared by Mind Unveiled, which I'm going to get to in a minute. But I just wanted to add that usually when I go to bed at night, I will have some sort of tablet beside me. I have not electronic tablet. I mean like an actual writing pad. And I have one that I call my commonplace book, that I can usually jot down anything that comes to mind while I'm trying to go to sleep or even while I'm out and about. I carry it with me. I didn't have it though while I was in bed. So this was on my mind so much last night that everything, not just the population chart, but so many other aspects, from the Cabbage Patch Babies to the orphan trains to the millennial kingdom, it all came flooding in and I could not get it out of my head. So since I didn't have my commonplace book with me, I actually had to go down in my kitchen after midnight because I didn't want to wake my husband up. And I had to actually just record myself on my phone, just like an audio recording, saying everything that I was thinking so that I wouldn't forget it by morning. And then I was actually able to sleep. Now, I don't know if this is exactly the same chart that Mind Unveiled used in their video, but it's pretty similar. And what it shows is the human population growth over the centuries since the year 1050. I think that their chart might have even gone back farther in time, but this at least gives you an idea of what I'm going to talk to you about. So first of all, I do want to say to take the chart with a grain of salt. We see that it's coming from the United Nations. And as you can see, they kind of show the human population was completely stagnant for at least 500 years until it kind of went up a little bit in 1650. And that completely flies in the face of exponential population growth. So I don't think that it was level for this amount of time. I think that the United Nations would like people to believe that it was level for this amount of time because they have to push the narrative, of the high infant mortality rate and the shorter lifespans. So I kind of I get it. Not only that, I was talking to my friend Donita and some other friends earlier today, and I think it may also have to do with them wanting to push the evolutionary theory because they believe that people were around much, much, much longer than, biblically speaking, they have been around. And so they would need to explain a much larger population than what we have today if they would have actually admitted to exponential population growth, because if you do things that way and people have been around that much longer, there should be way more than 7.5 billion people in the world by 2017. That's just the way that it is. So this part here, yeah, take it with a grain of salt. However, we also know that when it comes to the powers that be, they love to throw things in our faces. You know, the expression two truths and a lie. Well, I always say that with them, it comes usually down to two lies and a truth. And they will lie to you about practically everything, but they will just kind of give you tidbits of information. A lot of people believe it's because they have to let people know what they're doing. And I'm wondering if that's what they did here with all of a sudden this explosion of population. And I had been watching, I mentioned earlier, my lunch break, and he had mentioned in one of his videos that he believes that the reset happened before the year, sometime before the year 1860, which it could have been sometime around that. We know that our timeline is a bit messed up. And he doesn't, my lunch break, I love that channel. He goes mainly into the buildings though. He doesn't really get into what caused the reset or who the reset people were, like none of that. It's just mainly buildings, and that's his area of expertise, is the buildings. But I want to know the entire scenario around not just the buildings, but what exactly happened at that time. And so I've been talking about the millennial kingdom here a lot, and I know that I was trying to take a break from it and I just can't seem to get away from it, because all of a sudden I thought to myself, what if this sudden rapid increase in the population was due to the millennial kingdom coming to an end and the rest of the dead being resurrected? Now, at this point in time, I believe that the believers who were living in the millennial kingdom after it ended left and went to the camp of the saints, which I talked about in another video, that I believe may be at the North Pole. I don't know, it's just speculation. But that if you have the people coming out of the millennial kingdom who were not believers, so the unbelievers, they would just be living in, the rest of the world, not at the camp of the saints, but they would still be out populating everything. But the rest of the dead, if you consider that that would possibly be all of the people who died before Jesus's crucifixion, that would be a huge number of people. And it's my opinion that it would not just be adults being resurrected during that time period at the end of the millennial kingdom. It would include babies. It would include children. And do you see where I'm getting at when it comes to the Cabbage Patch babies, the orphan trains, and yes, this sudden explosion in population? Where else could it have come from but suddenly finding, I'd say, at least hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people suddenly appearing on the land? And I also want to add that the millennial kingdom ending around, we'll just say 1860, 1870. Okay. It could be give or take a few years. I don't know. That would still fall in with the idea that there have been many years added to our timeline. A lot of people believe that it's been 1,000 years, but there are some who think that it's closer to 800 years that have been added to our timeline. And if you take the 800 years away from, we'll say, 1870, then you would deduct the 1,000 years of the 1,000-year reign. You would be left with 70 AD, which is the time that Jerusalem fell, and that many people believe that the millennial kingdom may have started anyway. Because without that added 800 years, 1870 would have actually been 1070. not 1870. And adding that 800 years would just be to add to the deception for those unbelievers, and I would say the controllers who very possibly had Nephilim bloodlines. They would want to cover up the fact that the millennial kingdom had happened. So Revelation 20, and if you haven't watched my other videos before and aren't really sure what I'm talking about when it comes to the rest of the dead and the resurrection, and yeah, I'm going to start talking about the short season. This all can be found in Revelation 20. But Revelation 20 tells us that at the end of the 1,000 years, Satan will be released for some of the translations say for a little while. Some of them say for a little season, for a short season. But the idea is that Satan is going to be released for an amount of time, and he is going to be able to deceive the nations once more. So in my mind, when Satan is released from his prison at the end of the millennial kingdom, I don't think that he's going to be quiet about it. I think he's going to make, or that he did, make a big to-do about the fact that he was back. So I would expect there to be some sort of catastrophes, whether it would be mud floods, whether it would be earthquakes. Now that is a question because soil liquefaction can sink buildings, but these buildings all do seem to have been, if not sunken, they're covered evenly. And if you look at soil liquefaction in earthquakes of today, the buildings very often are not sinking evenly. They're very lopsided with soil liquefaction. So I'm starting to maybe think again about the earthquake, unless a substantial amount of time passed and these buildings were somehow able to level themselves out. I do think that there's better evidence that it was some sort of other catastrophe or some other disturbance. But what this required at this time, as you can see, is a huge amount of cleanup. And yes, this is the perfect photo to show you just how much cleanup was required. And it's also the perfect photo to show you why we have so many buildings today that have half covered basement windows, like this one. I mean, I have buildings like this around my neighborhood, not beautiful, exquisite buildings like this, but I'm saying buildings that have these half buried windows. And people will always say, well, they're basement windows. It's just to let the light in. It's that there's no mold that grows in the basement. Well, when they dig underneath some of these buildings and find 6-foot doors completely underground, you tend to think a little bit differently. So on top of that, we have these buried buildings, and then we have these beautifully constructed buildings that if you look at photos of the 1800s and you look at the history of that time and what they tell us, what tools they had at their disposal, it certainly doesn't seem like anything people of that time period would have been able to accomplish. And my lunch break does a fantastic job of going over those things. So at the end of the millennial kingdom, if there was some sort of calamity when Satan was released and there would have been this much destruction, I'm going to say that yes, it is very likely that whatever technology they had available to them before this reset happened, they would have lost. Yet they would still need to be able to come up with some sort of cover-up story because, again, I do believe that it would be their purpose that they would want to deceive even more people by just not letting them even know that the millennial kingdom had happened at all. Because one thing that I have thought about growing up in the church, and I did not grow up as a born again believer, but I still went to Sunday school. I became a born again believer in my early 30s. That's a completely different story. But I always thought to myself, well, the Bible keeps telling us that Jesus is coming soon. Jesus is coming soon. Why hasn't he come yet? And that is one thing that they use against him, against the people, to deceive them. They cover up the fact. I think that it's possible. I'm not saying that any of this is set in stone. I think it's very possible that they would cover up the fact that Jesus had already been back, because they would want people to have the very same thoughts that I even had as a child. So yes, it is my firm belief that Satan would have had his allies coming out of the millennial kingdom. And some of them, as I mentioned earlier, may very well have been from the Nephilim bloodline. And that is how we have so many of these, whether you call it Nephilim bloodline, fairy bloodline, elven bloodline, dragon bloodline, they go by so many different names. But the idea is that they have the blood of the Watchers in them. And I'm going to say they would likely have a very concentrated amount of the Watcher DNA in them because they are very, very careful about who they, quote, breed with, because they need to keep that bloodline going. So now that we've just got a basic storyline going on just the reset and the end of the millennial kingdom, let's get into these actual postcards of these Cabbage Patch babies. Now, Mind Unveiled, they have done also other videos on homunculi, which are basically maybe created through occult knowledge. So human beings created through occult knowledge, and they were often very much smaller. But they talked about that sort of technology being used possibly to create these clones of infants. Now, for me, I tend to think that it is not clones simply because of the word that is used to refer to these babies. They're called foundlings. And according to Black's Law Dictionary, foundlings are a deserted or exposed infant. I want you to remember that. A deserted or exposed infant. A child found, it doesn't say created, a child found without a parent or guardian, its relatives being unknown. It has a settlement in the district where found. So, as I mentioned before, they like to tell you what they're doing, and I think that people who have studied the language that we use to speak, just words such as cursive and spelling, they all mean something. So the words that they choose to describe things, they choose very carefully. Like even the fact that they say that buildings are founded. And most people will tell you that, oh, well, it just means that that's when they built it. Well, no, that's not actually what founded means. Again, here's the Law Dictionary. Founded means based upon, arising from, growing out of, or resting upon. So the question is, and I believe it was on my lunch break, he said, could that mean that arising from, growing out of could actually mean them digging these buildings out of the ground? So again, they are very, very careful when it comes to language, which is why I believe that these infants were found and not created. So as we sit on that for a while, let's just take a look at some of these postcards that are from, I believe most of them are from the early 1900s. Some of them could be from the late 1800s, but this actually says infant for sale. And I will show you that there is an entire website, 20 adorable and hilarious babies for sale postcards in France from the early 20th centuries. And you can kind of go through here and see these horrifying postcards that they call hilarious and adorable. And it's all about selling babies. There are, Mind Unveiled also shared photos of babies that were basically, it looks like they were being raffled off at the World's Fairs. I did try to find that one in, just on the DuckDuckGo search. I wasn't able to find that. But if you watch again the Mind Unveiled videos, you can see them there. Now, I will say I do not agree with everything that Mind Unveiled believes in, but they did fantastic research on these really strange postcards. and that is just a baby in one of these incubators. So when it comes to foundlings, my question is, did they find these babies after they were resurrected? Now, I'm going to tell you that some of the foundlings, I do believe, may have been actually taken from their parents when their parents were placed in lunatic asylums, because I believe that many people may have been trying to tell the truth about the millennial kingdom or about what really happened with the reset. They didn't want that to happen, so they may have very well taken their children as well. So some of these foundlings could have been from them. And also that's where some of the orphan trained children could have been also. But just from looking at the population growth, I'm thinking that there is far more to it than that. There was an actual explosion in population. And the way that the chart just keeps going up, you have to at least make the assumption that these people who possibly came back must have been able to procreate because of that massive spike in the population that you see. So now we're just going to go back to what the word foundling actually means, the legal definition, and one of them is that it's an exposed infant that was found. And so here's what I'm going to say to you. What if these foundlings were actually found in fields? If these resurrected children were found in fields, they certainly would have been exposed, wouldn't they? Now, the Cabbage Patch Babies idea, that actually comes from Russian and other Eastern folklore, where, over here in America, we say that babies come from the storks. The storks deliver the babies. But in Eastern Europe and in Russia, it's the cabbage fields. They come from the Cabbage Patch. So that might be where they came about with the whole Cabbage Patch idea. But I'm thinking that that might not be so far from the truth. And here's why. This is from Jasher, chapter 67. And someone sent this to me, someone emailed this to me, and I had never read this before, and I was blown away. At first, I was like, I don't know. But now that I'm thinking about this whole scenario, it seems to fit right in. So thank you, Marnie, for sending this to me. And I'm just going to read I'm going to read this whole section. The first few verses are only for context, but I didn't want to just read just the ones that pertain to this because I want you to know basically where it's coming from. So it says, "If it please the king, let him order all their children, which shall be born from this day forward, to be thrown into the water. For by this canst thou wipe away their name, for none of them, nor of their fathers, were tried in this manner. And the king heard the words of Balaam, and the thing pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Balaam. And the king ordered a proclamation to be issued, and a law to be made throughout the land of Egypt, saying, Every male child born to the Hebrews from this day forward shall be thrown into the water. And Pharaoh called unto all his servants, saying, Go now and seek throughout the land of Goshen, where the children of Israel are, and see that every son born to the Hebrews shall be cast into the river, but every daughter you shall let live. And when the children of Israel heard this thing which Pharaoh had commanded, to cast their male children into the river, some of the people separated from their wives, and others adhered to them. And from that day forward," and this is the part where I really want you to start paying attention, "and from that day forward, when the time of delivery arrived to those women of Israel who had remained with their husbands, they went to the fields to bring forth there," so to give birth there. "And they brought forth in the fields, and left their children upon the field, and returned home." So these women gave birth in the fields. They left their infants there, and they returned home. They left them exposed, so to speak. However, verse 55 says, "And the Lord, who had sworn to their ancestors to multiply them, sent one of his ministering angels, which are in heaven, to wash each child in water, to anoint and swathe it, and to put into its hands two smooth stones from one of which it sucked milk and from the other honey. And he caused its hair to grow to its knees, by which it might cover itself, to comfort it, and to cleave to it, through his compassion for it. And when God had compassion over them and had desired to multiply them upon the face of the land, and this is talking about the infants, he ordered his earth to receive them, to be preserved therein till the time of their growing up, after which the earth opened its mouth and vomited them forth, and they sprouted forth from the city like the herb of the earth and the grass of the forest, and they returned each to his family and to his father's house, and they remained with them. And the babes of the children of Israel were upon the earth like the herb of the field through God's grace to them. And as I just read this, especially verse 56, where he ordered his earth to receive them, to be preserved till the time of their growing up. And then when they did, the earth opened its mouth and vomited them forth, and they sprouted forth from the city like the herb of the earth and the grass of the forest. So yes, I do believe that it's very possible that these children may have actually been found in fields, because it certainly would not be the first time that there were infants in fields. So you very likely have children who may have been adopted by some families, but others who may have grown up into a life of indentured servitude. And you do have these whimsical postcards being created as advertisements for the sale of these infants. So now let's briefly take a look at something a bit more recent. The dolls that were called Cabbage Patch Kids. I had multiple Cabbage Patch Kids. I was completely enamored with them. And I remember the first year that they came out, they were a hot commodity. They were like Tickle Me Elmo. They were like the Stanley Cups that you have people like going crazy for. I don't know why. But anyway, people going crazy for these Stanley Cups. And that's what these Cabbage Patch Kids were. And a bit odd now that you see these old postcards where showing babies, kind of being grown in heads of cabbage. And as weird as that is, and I learned this also from Mind Unveiled, the history of Cabbage Patch Kids is a bit strange. I'm just going to start reading right here, but I always tell you in every video that the articles that I read from, I always leave links to them in the description box if you ever want to go back and read through the whole thing. But I'm just going to start right here. It says, in order to attract potential doll manufacturers and to create the entertainment and publishing businesses he envisioned, Schlafer and his partner wife wrote The Legend of the Cabbage Patch Kids. To make sense of how special cabbages gave birth to Cabbage Patch Kids, Schlafer invented bunny bees, the bee-like creatures that use their rabbit ears to fly about and pollinate cabbages with magic crystals. Since Roberts insisted on being a character in the story, Schlafer created him as a curious 10-year-old boy who discovered the Cabbage Patch Kids by following a bunny bee behind a waterfall into a magical cabbage patch, where he found the Cabbage Patch babies being born in a neglected garden. To save them from being abducted to work in the gold mines operated by the villainous Lavender McDade and her two cohorts in crime, Cabbage Jack and Bo Weasel, young Roberts tried to save them by finding loving parents who would adopt them and keep them safe in their homes. I'll tell you, as much as I loved Cabbage Patch Kids, I never heard that story. But it goes even farther than that. So here we have, there are gold mines that are located near Cleveland, Georgia. What else is in Cleveland, Georgia? Why, Babyland General, the Cabbage Patch Kid hospital that you can go and tour, is in Cleveland, Georgia. So we actually do have gold mines in the area where these Cabbage Patch Kids have this hospital. And I'm talking about the dolls. My sister took my nieces there in the 80s because my nieces, this is just not really pertinent, but I'll just share it. My nieces were like closer to my age than my sister was. So my nieces were more like my sister. So they're like around my age. And in the 80s, yes, she took them to this Babyland General, and they visited there. Oh, right here it is, Babyland General Hospital. And that's right. See, in Cleveland, Georgia. And yes, there are gold mines in Cleveland, Georgia. So then it just brings you to this whole idea of these orphan trains. So were these children on these orphan trains, depending on how early or how late they were on the orphan trains, could they have been resurrected children? Yes, also children of people placed in lunatic asylums, but could some of them have been resurrected children? Or could they, well, yeah, or could they have been the resurrected infants who then grew up, possibly if they could have been placed on the orphan trains if they did not have, if they were not adopted out, if they were not sold, if they were not won as a prize in a raffle, would they then have grown up to board these orphan trains to, some of them, yes, some of them may have gone to caring homes. Others did live a life of indentured servitude. And, child labor was rampant in this time period. And you have to wonder, was it these orphan trained children? Was it these, could it have been resurrected, just kind of children who were reborn in another time? Just looking at this photo, I wonder, I don't know if possibly these are the people who were taking in these boys from the orphan train. I don't know if they were some sort of handlers. But, when I look at these photos, I always do hope that these children did have a better life than what we often think they did. Looking at these pictures, though, sadly, I doubt it. And even thinking of these whimsical postcards showing these babies, in Cabbage Patches, or they put them in other settings also in these photos. And the Cabbage Patch Kid history, so to speak, are those forms of legomanism? Were they trying to tell a story to others in the know? And so you might be wondering, if you haven't seen some of my videos, you might be wondering, well, what is legomanism? So legomanism is, in occult traditions, a method by which wisdom traditions are transmitted in a form that appears to be intended for an entirely different purpose. So when you see these photos of these children, these babies, like that website, they thought they were comical, they thought they were cute, but were they actually for that purpose, or was it to let people know that these babies were found in fields? That's my theory. And there were just multitudes of these children. And many of the postcards actually do say repopulation. And so my thought was that after the reset, if the believers did go to the camp of the saints, they would have lost a portion of the population. And did they kind of look at these possibly resurrected people as their new population? And the photos and the postcards, they remind me of these Ann Getty's photos, like, which I always thought they were adorable. I used to buy Ann Getty's calendars and everything, and they're adorable. The babies are absolutely adorable. And I wonder if she did get inspiration from those postcards. Did she know, the ulterior motive behind it? I don't know, but this is something that I think of. And actually, there is an Ann Getty's photo of a child in a cabbage, I believe. Let's just check that. Yeah. So there we go. That's an Ann Getty's photo, much more recent. So I mentioned the asylums, the lunatic asylums that many of the parents may have been placed in. There were also infant asylums and orphan asylums. And this is an infant and orphan asylum, and it is Wanstead. I don't know if it's Wanstead or Wanstead, but look at this. Look at the size of this. And the first thing that I thought to myself was, okay, they either had a ton of infant and orphan or older children, foundlings, to house, or they found this building and didn't have a whole lot of children, but didn't have anything better to use it for. I'm thinking that it was probably both. I think they found the building or reused it, and then they likely had a large amount of children put in there. So I decided to look up Wanstead Infant Orphan Asylum. I found something very interesting. So this was in London. Okay. It was founded, it was not built, it was founded in 1827 by the Reverend, later Sir Andrew Reed. He was a minister in the Congregational Church and a prolific philanthropist. So, as well as the Wanstead Institution, the London Orphan Asylum, Asylum for Fatherless Children, the Earlswood Asylum for Idiots, and the Royal Hospital for Incurables all owed their existence to his efforts. So I'm like, hold the phone. Go back there. Rewind. London Orphan Asylum? Well, this one is in London. And that looks like a pretty darn big building. They needed another one around the same area? So let's look at the London Orphan Asylum. Well, here's the floor plan. There you go. That is the London Orphan Asylum, in pretty much the same vicinity as the Wanstead Orphan Asylum. So, and this very Romanesque looking, in my opinion. So what's going on? How many do we need? Wait, hold on. There's another one. The Asylum for Fatherless Children. All right, let's click on that one. Here we go. This is in Surrey. So first of all, let's look and see what this one looked like. That's just a part of it. We've got the floor plan up. Another pretty huge building. The new building could accommodate 300. Okay, so we've got another building here that could accommodate 300 infants or children in Surrey. So I'm not from the UK, so I don't know where Surrey is in relation to London. So I decided to look it up. Well, the train journey time from London and Surrey is around 46 minutes and covers a distance of around 21 miles. That's on the train. So why do we need to have this many infant asylums in pretty much the same area? Yeah, I'm a bit confused about that whole thing. You don't need that many unless you have a massive influx of infants and children. And I have a hard time believing that they all came from the people in the asylums because, I mean, at least if you're going to believe the population growth on this map, they weren't having a whole lot of children. So where did all these children come from? That's my question. Are they the rest of the dead? Obviously, adults would have been included too, but I'm focusing on the Cabbage Patch babies, the so-called Cabbage Patch babies, and these orphan children today. And this just huge spike in population that started right around the time that we believe this reset or possibly the end of the millennial kingdom happened. So the next question is, could this all explain the discrepancies that people have in their family histories? Because I get comments from people on both ends. My cat is trying to interject her opinion, but I get comments from both ends. And I have some people telling me that they have almost little to no family history, that their grandparents know nothing about where they came from. And then we have other people who have extensive family histories. And could that be where the discrepancy is? Could that be because some of these people are the descendants of those who lived through the millennial kingdom and then just came out of the millennial kingdom and then had descendants? Or could some of these people be the descendants of the ones who may have been resurrected? The resurrection that is mentioned in Revelation 20. And I actually have something interesting in, my own family history. So one thing that I love about my lunch break is that he always points out these filler stories in Wikipedia, how they, and I've mentioned this before, how all the fires that they put in, and they always say that important papers were locked in fire safe boxes, but they still burned. Like, that's also another common narrative that you see on Wikipedia. And just so many repetitions, not just in Wikipedia, but just in history in general. You see a lot of the same kind of generic excuses going on over and over and over again. And that can also very well happen in our own family histories. And here's how I know that. We have a few family stories that I was always able to remember even from childhood because I found them to be so interesting. And some of those family stories are the fact that my great grandfather changed his last name and wouldn't tell anyone what his real last name was and wouldn't tell them why he changed it. So we can't really go back on that line of history because we have no way of knowing what his last name was. Additionally, we have another family member who was hanged for being a horse thief. Okay, so those are two stories that I found interesting. Okay, I've got a relative who was hanged for being a horse thief, and then my great grandfather changed his last name and wouldn't tell anyone what it was. That's kind of weird. Well, my now son-in-law, the first year that he and my daughter were dating, he was telling me how they have a family story that one of his like great great grandfathers or great grandfather fled Europe because he committed some crime and changed his last name and wouldn't tell anyone what it was. And then additionally, he had a horse thief story in his history too. Now, I don't think that his included his relative being hanged, but there was a horse thief and he had a relative who fled Europe for committing a crime and changed his last name. And before you think, oh my gosh, maybe her daughter married someone who's related to them. No, they don't even come from the same countries in Europe that we do. So no relatives that are the same in our families, but these stories are the same. Just like with urban legends, that often, you will hear the same story about different locations, but it's all the same story. I believe there are a lot of filler stories in our histories. And if you ask enough people, you will find others who have the same sorts of family stories that you do. And it's likely because they were just made up. I've also started to wonder how accurate our oral histories of our families are. Now, I know that back in biblical times, that the people actually memorized the Torah. And I've talked about this in another video. We have declined over the years. We have not gotten better. It's entropy. It's not evolution. We have de-evolved. And yes, our memories have gotten worse. And they're continually getting worse, and they're going to continue to get worse. But many of the stories that we tell orally. And so I have another example. When I was a child, I loved to visit my great uncle. He and his wife lived in they lived in San Antonio, Texas. And he would come up to Pennsylvania, every summer or something to stay with their children, and we would go and visit him. And I thought it was the coolest thing because the reason that my great uncle lived in Texas was because he worked for NASA. Now, I don't know if it was, if he worked specifically for NASA or for a contractor of NASA. I just knew that he did stuff for NASA and I thought it was cool. And I will tell you that this is part of the reason that I think it took me so long to let go of the space narrative, because I grew up with a great uncle who worked there and I thought it was the coolest thing. And then when I realized that NASA is very compartmentalized and he probably had no idea what was going on. And now I'm like, yeah, NASA is okay. I know what they really are. Still love my uncle though. But anyway, and my mother always would tell me that my great uncle designed the first astronaut helmet. But then another relative told me that my great uncle designed the first astronaut suit. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to look this up because I want to know what it was that he created, even though they were never used on anything other than a sound studio. And so I looked it up. My uncle's name doesn't show up anywhere. Nothing to do with this. And I mean, this is what he was known for in our family. And there is nothing, no history. So not only could my family members not even keep it straight for what he did, but nowhere to be found is this information. So, we need to be really careful to trust that our family histories are 100% accurate, because it's very, very likely that, as with the rest of the history of the world, they're not very accurate. That's not accurate. History of the world is pretty much fabricated. So why would our family histories not be also? I'm not saying all of it. Let's not forget, they kind of mix in truth and lies. And family histories are more likely to be accurate because most families don't have some ulterior motive. But you are going to get some discrepancies in there. And so could these reasons be why? So anyway, I think that I covered everything. And I don't even know how long this is because I don't have the timer going, but I hope that you're still with me. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one either here or over on Instagram. And if you like my work, you can check out my channel membership, which I just recently opened up. And I hope you have a great day.